Let's get right to it here.
You did start the recording, by the way.
Thank you. Such a gentleman. All right. Welcome back. It is so good to be back, but it'll be even better when we're in person. I can't wait to be back in the classroom with you guys. But like I said, it's just good to be back here. So I want to talk about the January schedule for now because that's all that we can really control right now. I'm assuming that there's going to be more guidance from our school district as this week kind of unfolds here. I know that our school district basically has a plan for elementary moving forward, but there hasn't been a whole lot for the secondary. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Big thing that I want you guys to understand is this, okay? The Civil War Lecture 1 for Play Posit, okay, so the first Play Posit, that has gone in the grade book. Now, if you want to go in and redo your Play Posit because you didn't get all the points or you got an incomplete or whatever, or you just hadn't done it yet, if you want me to update the gradebook, please email me because I don't get notifications when stuff gets turned into Play Posit. That's the only part that I really don't like about Play Posit is I don't really get notifications when stuff gets turned in. So if you could just shoot me an email and say, hey, that's all finished up, I can go from there. You don't need to do that for like the part 2 because I haven't put that in the gradebook yet. But like kind of like if you're completing stuff later, whether that's a Play Posit or a Flipgrid, and if you want me to update the gradebook, just shoot me an email, and typically I can do that within the hour. But just FYI, unless, I mean, I will get it updated. It just won't be as prompt if you don't shoot me an email, okay? Feedback from the Flipgrids has been kind of as such. Hopefully you guys are able to access that feedback because I've been posting a video response for at least your first Flipgrid for everybody, okay? And in order to access that, look at the link on Schoology if you're confused about how to do that. But anyway, some of the pretty consistent feedback has been this. Like you've given me a great question and you've talked about why you like the question, but then you didn't tell me like what you learned about it, okay? This isn't a Flipgrid to tell me like what you speculate might happen about your question. I want you to actually go out there and research and tell me some viewpoints like, hey, this person said this, or this person said this, or maybe here's the opposing viewpoints, or you don't even, your conclusions could be inconclusive but the point of the Flipgrid is for you to tell me what you learned about your topic that you chose. Okay, so if I didn't give you full credit on that, it's because that might be one of the reasons. Again, look at the feedback to see how you can change it, but you can always get full credit on your Flipgrid just by reposting. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to spend some time going through this crash course in the Civil War. I'll do this with you. Then individually, you are going to work on the Chapter 4 guided notes, and I'll show you how to do that. And then you are going to pick a personalized topic. Now, you're not going to do anything with this quite yet. You're not going to do anything with this today, but I do want to give you a heads up that when we come back on Thursday, you are going to be doing something with that personalized topic. So I just wanted to give you kind of fair warning there, okay? So pay attention to these due dates over on the right-hand side here. This crash course, Civil War, like I said, we're going to do this together. Your Chapter 4 guided notes. Let's take a look at that real quick to see how you would do that. So under here, under Division and Civil War, you've got these activities. You've got your Chapter 4 guided notes. Open up this one and put that PDF right in Notability. You don't have to do it right now, but that's how you would do it later, is you're going to put that PDF in Notability and then take note of this right here. You're going to need Chapter 4. You're going to need Chapter 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Open up this chapter, and it'll help you complete these guided notes that start right with Chapter 4, Section 1, right from the beginning of that chapter. Okay, so click on Unit 2, Chapter 4 in order to complete that. All right. Then, what else did I want to show you? I wanted to show you the Civil War individualized learning topics. So what could you do your individualized or personalized learning topic about at the end of the week here? I want you to start thinking about something that you're interested in because you're going to be researching this on your own. Okay, so it's kind of organized like the last one. So you've got military topics on top here. Okay, political topics. Okay, and I didn't even phrase a lot of these in form of a question. You're going to have to pose your own open-ended question. Okay, it's poetry, music, Northern draft riots. You've got some African-American topics and then general topics here, okay? So skim through that list. Again, you're not confined to what's on this list, but if you're not choosing something off that list, hopefully you are asking and I can kind of help guide you in one way or another. So yeah, that's that. Let's go back to... You are all going to open up this link right here and go to CC the Civil War, and we're going to complete this together. So have this open in Notability, and we're going to watch this together. Now, I'm going to have to...
let me open it in Notability.
Say again?
It won't let me open it in Notability unless it's just me. I can't download it. It says, oops, page not found. Is anybody else having that problem, or is it just me? Maybe it's just me. I got that far, but then I can't upload it into Notability for some reason.
Well, let's see if the kids have an issue with it. Maybe it's because you and I might be the only ones on a desktop.
I'm not, though.
You're not?
Danielle's having the issue. Anybody else? The heck? Is it something because that video link's at the top?
I don't have Notability on here, but I have it on iPad. Yeah, I'm just fine here.
I'm on my iPad.
Got it.
Everybody else is good? No one's talking?
I'm good.
Everybody's good?
Jerks. I don't know why mine's not working. Okay.
Okay. Danielle and Mr. Winters, there's only 11 questions on here. So if you want to just open up like Notability and just jot these down, or you could do it just on a piece of notebook paper or something like that and take a picture of it and submit this when we're done. That might work too, okay? Okay. So here we go. Typically, this is going to play. Hold on one second. So typically I would play this on its own screen.
2020.
But I'm going to...
That's it. Calling anyone with grit.
Do it this way so that I can still talk to you, okay? So first thing we're looking for here. Okay? What 4 wars combined did not have the number of casualties of the Civil War? Okay, what 4 wars combined? Here we go.
Green, this is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we come at last to the Civil War, the conflict that in many ways created a nation. So here's what you won't be getting today. We will not be describing battles and tactics. If that's your bag, might I suggest Ken Burns, or if you prefer books like 1,000 authors, my favorites being James McPherson and Shelby Foote. And number 2, we won't be bashing and or praising Abraham Lincoln very much, although we do have multiple Lincolns here because we've heard that's good for ratings. I mean, to watch or read certain accounts, you would think that the Civil War was a lengthy chess game played by Abraham Lincoln against his cunning opponent, Abraham Lincoln. But of course, there were other people involved. We are going to quote a fair bit of Lincoln, though, because, you know, that won Tony Kushner an Academy Award nomination. 3, we won't be claiming that the Civil War was somehow secretly about something other than slavery, because that is just so early 20th century. And number 4, there will not be a lot of jokes today, because ha, 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 700,000 people died. Mr. Green, actually only 680,000 people died. Yeah, it depends on how you count, you sniveling little ghoul. But recent estimates are between 680,000 and 800,000 total casualties, deadlier for Americans than the American.
Deadlier for Americans than the American Revolution. And you can shorthand this. You can go WW1, WW2, and Vietnam combined. Okay, so even your most conservative figures will have deaths about, or excuse me, casualties in at least 600,000. Okay. I just looked up this morning, and Americans that have lost their life due to COVID is in the 300,000s. Now, obviously, we have a lot more human beings living in the United States now than we did back then. But it just kind of puts it into a frame of reference for you. So we're on to number 2. What 4 states had slavery, what 4 states that had slavery did not leave the Union, otherwise known as the border states?
American Revolution, World War I, World War II, and Vietnam combined. So let's start with some basic facts about the American Civil War. 1861 to 1865, which corresponded with the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, the Union, or more colloquially, the North, fought against the forces of the Confederate States of America, or the South. Sometimes people call the Union the blue and the Confederates the gray, but in fact, the uniforms weren't very uniform. They were all different kinds of color, and also, with all that dirt and blood, they were all just brown. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. You'll notice from this map that not all the states that held slaves were part of the Confederacy. The border states of Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, and Maryland.
The border states of Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, and Maryland. The border states are those states that did not leave the Union, still had slavery. And as we talked about before, when the Emancipation Proclamation came along, it did not free the slaves in the border states, just the states that were a part of the Confederacy.
Allowed slavery and never left the United States. All of these border states were critical to the Union. Maryland was north of the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Kentucky controlled the Ohio River. Missouri was the gateway to the West. Delaware actually wasn't that important. So none of that should be particularly controversial unless you're from Delaware. But the causes of the war, that's another story. The Civil War was about slavery. Actual historians will back me up on this, like David Goldfield, who wrote, "Both Northerners and Southerners recognized slavery as the immediate cause of the Civil War." Also, Lincoln said in his second inaugural address, 1/8 of the whole population were colored slaves, not distributed generally over the Union, but localized in the southern part of it. These slaves constituted a peculiar and powerful interest. All knew that this interest was somehow the cause of the war. That said, in comments, lots of people will be like, the war was about agriculture versus industry, or the states' rights to protect themselves from the tyranny of a big federal government. But if it were really about that, the Civil War would have started during the nullification crisis in the 1830s, when, as I'm sure you'll remember, Andrew Jackson said that South Carolina couldn't declare.
Andrew Jackson, number 3. If the war were really about the differences in economic means or states' rights, the war should have been started earlier during the nullification crisis under Andrew Jackson. We're on to number 4 now. What was the approximate population of the North at the time of the war?
Federal tariff null in their state. Why didn't that cause a civil war? The Confederate government passed the first conscription act in American history, implemented national taxes, created a national currency, and had a government bureaucracy of about 70,000 people, more than the federal bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. Thanks, Thought Bubble. That said, in the beginning of the war, Lincoln deliberately tried to downplay the slavery angle, arguing that the war was only about preserving the Union. But the war was also about religion for both sides. As David Goldfield put it, in protecting the revolutionary ideals, Northerners would preserve God's plan to extend democracy and Christianity across an unbroken continent and around the world. Southerners welcomed a war to create a nation more perfect in its fealty to God than the one that they had left. But it's also important to remember that regular soldiers often had more prosaic reasons for going off to fight, as you will eventually learn when you are forced to read the Red Badge of Courage. Goldfield tells the story of one Alabamian who enlisted only after his girlfriend mailed him a dress and told him he should start wearing it if he wasn't willing to fight. And for Northerners, Union, religion, and an end to slavery mixed together to form a potent rationale for war. It's summed up nicely by Julia Ward Howe's words to the song that would become famous as the battle hymn of the Republic. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free. You thought I was going to sing, but you were wrong. So spoiler alert, the Union won the war, which in a sense is unsurprising because they had massive advantages. For starters, they had many more people, approximately 22 million as
22 million. So the North had 22 million. The South had 9 million. 3.5 million were slaves. Just to put that into context of what the population of the United States is now, I was trying to look it up on my phone as I so conveniently dropped it on my computer. 328 million right now was the latest population of the United States. So that just kind of puts it into context with what you're dealing with here. Okay, so when you try to, think about the amount of casualties, that's in reference to 22 plus 9 million, as opposed to the 328 million that we have now.
Compared to 9 million in the South, of whom 3.5 million were slaves and therefore unlikely to be sympathetic to the Southern cause. Also, the North manufactured more than 90% of all goods in America. Its factories turned out 17 times more textiles than the South, 30 times more shoes and boots, 13 times more iron, and 32 times more firearms. Plus, at the outbreak of the war, the North had 20,000 miles of railroad compared with the South's 10,000.
20,000? How many miles of railroad? 20,000.
This made it easier for the Union to move its army, which over the course of the war enlisted more than 2 million men compared with 900,000 for the Confederacy. Even Northern agriculture was more productive, taking greater advantage of mechanization than Southern farmers did. Really, the only advantage the South had was better military leaders, like most of the tactically famous generals of the Civil War, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson.
The main advantage for the South, number 6, military generals. Military leadership. Either of those will work.
Jeb Stuart, etc. were Southerners, and also, by the way, they all had great last words. Lee said, "Strike the tent." Stonewall Jackson said, "Let us cross over the river and rest under the shade of those trees." And Jeb Stuart, after being mortally wounded in battle, said to his close friend and lieutenant, "Honey bun, how do I look in the face?" Famous Union General Ulysses S. Grant's last word was water, which isn't nearly so good, but he said that last word after having survived the war and getting to be like president of the United States and stuff. Right, but anyway, this all raises an interesting question. Was the result of the war a foregone conclusion? The Confederacy had to create a nation from scratch and build national unity among people who were committed to the autonomy of their individual home states, so that's a problem. And then there was the issue of overcoming class conflicts, especially when the ruling class was often exempted from actually fighting in the war. But when you put aside all that nation-building stuff and just focus on the actual fighting of the war, the question of the Union's inevitable win becomes much trickier. Some have argued that all the Confederacy really needed to do was outlast the Northern efforts to bring them back into the Union.
Hopefully you guys remember when we were talking about a war of attrition, outlasting. Listen to this part.
Like Washington had to do against the British. And the idea was that this war of attrition would eventually wear down Northern resolve. But there were two problems with this theory. First, the North had such superiority in its resources that it would take a long time to wear down. Secondly, fighting a war of attrition would be costly to the South as well, and their resources would be depleted long before the North's. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? The rules here are simple. Whoa! That was intense. I try to identify the author of the mystery document. If I am right, I do not get shocked, but I'm never right because Stan makes it too hard. All right, let's see what we got today. I therefore determined first to use the greatest number of troops practicable against the armed force of the enemy, preventing him from using the same force at different seasons, and second, to hammer continuously against the armed force of the enemy and his resources until by mere attrition there should be nothing left to him but submission. Okay, so the strategy of attrition was a Confederate strategy, but Stan is a jerk. But it talks about the enemy and his resources, which was kind of a Union focus, and more importantly, it talks about preventing him from using the same force at different seasons. That makes me think it is a Union general. Final answer, Ulysses S. Grant.
Grant. Number 7 is Grant. We're on to the second page here.
Oh, how do you like them apples? Grant was different from previous Union generals in that he was willing to sustain enormous casualties in pursuit of his goal to wear down the South. Because of this, Grant was often branded a butcher.
Okay, here we go. Number 8. Grant was unique in that he was totally okay with having huge losses of life among his troops if it helped him win the battle or the war. This is why some refer to him as the Butcher. The Butcher.
Like, he was willing to weather incredible losses, including the 52,000 men, 41% of his army, who were injured or killed at the battles of the Wilderness and Cold Harbor. But his grim determination not just to defeat, but to destroy his opponent is what made Grant one of the first truly modern generals, and also the most successful leader the Union found. So Grant's brutal strategy, coupled with the vast superiority in Northern resources, suggests that the outcome of the Civil War really was inevitable, but it also points to some of the reasons to be cautious about that conclusion. First off, it took 3 years before the Union...
3 years. It was a 5-year war, folks, and it took 3 years before the Union adopted Grant's strategies. 3. We're on to number 10.
Actually fully adopted Grant's strategy, and between 1861 and 1864, it was possible that Southern victories would eventually force the Union to give in. I mean, the Union lost a lot of battles in the first 2 years, largely due to ineffective generaling, and nothing saps a nation's motivation for war like losing. Now, some argue that the North had superior motivation to prosecute the war because they had God on their side and they were against slavery, but that's also pretty problematic. I mean, for many men who joined the Federal Army, a war to end slavery had very little appeal, especially poor enlistees who might be afraid that newly freed slaves would compete with them for jobs. Also, while we are correct in considering slavery unjust, Southerners who took up arms for the Confederacy saw themselves as engaged in a fight for their own freedom rather than a fight to protect slavery. The truth is, when it comes to fighting, motivation is a very tricky business, and I'm most comfortable agreeing with James McPherson, who argued that motivation waxes and wanes with victory, and that the outcome of the war was contingent on a number of turning points. And we're just going to discuss two of the most important, July 1863 and August 1864. July 1863 saw two of the most important Union victories in the whole war. In the Western Theater, General Grant laid siege to and captured Vicksburg, Mississippi, thus giving the Federals control of the lower Mississippi River. I mean, by then the North already had New Orleans, which made it pretty much impossible for the Confederates to ship cotton or anything else along the Mississippi River. After that, Grant was able to turn his attention to the east with the aforementioned hammering of the enemy and their resources. More famously, especially in the eastern part of the United States, the first 3 days of July 1863 saw the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. This was General Lee's furthest major offensive in the North, and had he won the battle, it is likely that panic would have set in places like Philadelphia and maybe even New York. Actually, panic did overcome New York in draft riots.
The draft riots, one of the uglier parts of the Civil War was the New York City draft riots. Once conscription hit, the draft, people went out into the street and not just protested, but they set buildings on fire, and any black person that they could find, they lynched. Pretty ugly situation, the New York City draft riots. So maybe that's something you guys would like to learn about in your personalized learning topic later. I don't know. But we're on to number 11. The capture of Atlanta was more of a big deal than a military conquest because it had to do with what political event happening at the time.
That killed more than 100 people and only ended after troops from Gettysburg were called in. I'm not going to go into detail about either of these battles, but they shifted the tide of the war in favor of the North, although not enough to bring the war to a quick end. Confederate forces would never again threaten a northern city. August 1864 saw another turning point that really spelled the doom of the Confederacy, and that was when Union General Sherman took Atlanta. Atlanta was a railroad hub and manufacturing center, but its capture was more significant politically than militarily because it happened close to the election of 1860.
The election of 1864. Lincoln had to run for re-election in 1864. Fourth year of the war, and he didn't think that he was going to get re-elected. There's some really famous correspondence between him and people like Frederick Douglass talking about maybe we need to get as many slaves out of the South as we can because I'm going to lose this election. Pretty scary situation for Lincoln. But when the fall of Atlanta happened, a lot of people think that solidified him winning the re-election. Because had he not, there were a group of people called the Copperheads that wanted the war over.
And that American election was really the last time that the Confederate States of America could have won the Civil War. It's easy to forget this, but Lincoln actually had to run for re-election during the Civil War, and by the summer of 1864, the war was pretty unpopular, and it looked like Lincoln might lose. The capture of Atlanta changed public opinion about Lincoln, and it meant that his Democratic opponent and former top general, George McClellan, didn't stand a chance of winning, which was really significant for the war because Lincoln was committed to ending it with a Union victory, and McClellan well, and I think it says a lot about American history that in the end, the war's outcome was ensured not just by military victories, but by a political one. Next week, we'll examine the effects of the Civil War and...
Okay. Any that I missed, folks? Anything that I can help you out with? Any numbers you missed? Feel free to ask right now.
I think I missed question 2.
2. What 4 states had slavery? Excuse me. Wow. What 4 states that had slavery did not leave the Union? We've got Missouri. We've got Kentucky. We've got Delaware.
In Maryland.
In Maryland. Very good. Any others?
I missed 5 and 6.
How many miles of railroad were in the north? That's 20,000 miles as opposed to the south's 10,000. And then what was the main advantage of the South? Number 6, their military generals. Anything else, kids? Feel free to submit that into the Dropbox there. Like I